that photograph of her in that bank that they robbed, holding a gun, and that the argument was, she was forced to look. They had a gun on her. She had to do this. Too, she was a willing participant. I guess she was brainwashed for a while, wasn't she?
Well, I think that's where they first started talking about what became known as the Stockholm Syndrome. You become identify with your oppressors, and you start to think and act with them.
And it was really an extreme, what John Mack would call an ontological shock. Where your worldview is shattered, and you have to kind of pick up the pieces of your life and try to make sense of everything. Then the second person we chose, Connie J. Cannon, is a retired nurse from St. Augustine, and she's now 70. She was first abducted at the age of 4, and she's kept these experiences pretty much to herself for fear of ridicule. And now at 70, it's like she doesn't care anymore. Who knows? And she came out a couple of years ago on our blog with this very moving and dramatic story about an abduction that happened in 1981 to her and her youngest son when they suddenly found themselves on a military base. Then there's Diane Fine.
So what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, that's Charles Fontaine's story. Charles and his wife, Helene, are conservative French-Canadian Catholics who had never thought much about UFOs. They were something from the movies, television. As Charles said, I thought if they were real, the U.S. military or government would have told us long ago, he said, which seemed very naive, but that was his belief. And so one morning, it was late March in 2011, their dog jumped up on the bed at 3 a.m. and started growling and barking and wouldn't get down. It was very unusual behavior. They finally calmed the dog down and went back to sleep. Charles got up about 5 o'clock, his usual time, because they live in the countryside outside of Montreal, and he drives into the city where he works and takes his daughter to college.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, he lets Spot, the dog, out the back door to do its business first thing in the morning, but the dog refused to go out. But he was a little annoyed by it, so he just kind of pushed him out.
Go, dog, go.
Yeah, get out there. Yeah, and they stepped outside. And that's when he noticed these odd lights in the field adjacent to his property. There's a farmer's field back there. And the patio lights came on automatically as Spot tripped the sensor, and then Charles quickly turned it off so he could see the lights in the field. They were shaped like inverted ice cream cones, and it looked like there was energy rising up from these tubes to something above that he couldn't see. It was just a dark object. And he counted 9 of these cones of light. And he stared at them, watched them, fascinated for a couple of minutes. Then he said, Helene's got to see this, to himself. Helene's got to see this. So he went in and woke her up, came out, and they were still there, and they were both watching them. And oddly enough, she remembers only counting 5 of them, and they seemed to be moving closer to them. That's when Charles saw a different sort of light right in the backyard. This one was a vertical, rotating band of light with luminous blue O-rings that were moving inside the band. And then he saw that it was some kind of craft with gray metallic structure on either side of the band of light. So it was like a UFO saucer-shaped, but it was vertical rather than horizontal, and moving towards him. He turned to the dog Spot, and that was the last thing he remembered seeing, Spot covered in a gold light. The next thing he realizes is that he's taking a shower, and he doesn't know how he got there, what happened. And his wife had a vague, dreamlike memory of being floated into bed, sinking into the bed, as if she weighed 500 pounds, and the bed just folding around her, and she fell back to sleep. They both had severe headaches afterwards for several weeks.
And terrible insomnia.
Yeah, and so there was a physical after effect as well as a mental, psychological one. That encounter came 1 month after his experience that I just described from Andros. He and a girlfriend were left, taking a night flight from Miami. They went out, and he actually was in the very same area where they had come out of that tunnel when they spotted an orange light in the distance. And he pointed out, and the light kept getting bigger and bigger, coming closer and closer, and finally he could see what appeared to be a large metallic craft with a dome on the top, and it was coming right at them, and he was certain it was going to hit him. He tried to maneuver around it, but there was no way of getting around it, and suddenly, boom, it was gone.
And he said this thing was 3 times the size of a Boeing 747.
And
3 times.
Yeah, and so he had no idea what happened, and he went back home. Well, we had an opportunity to give this experience without saying what happened to a former CIA remote viewer, Joe McMoneagle.
Oh, I know Joe, sure.
Yeah, what we described it in an envelope, and on the envelope we only put numbers, and that's all he had was the numbers, and the description was inside the envelope, and Joe described it as, he said, this airplane, Bruce, the person in there was abducted, but not only abducted, but the whole airplane was taken. I mean, it was amazing that he could pick up anything like that. But he picked up on the flight, and what happened, that it was a UFO encounter, and the plane was taken.
Was swallowed.
It was what?
Swallowed.
Yeah. Now, isn't there also there's a Navy base out that way, isn't there?
Exactly.
Yeah, AWTEC is very strange. It's a supposedly secret Navy base. It stands for Atlantic Underwater Test and Evaluation Center.
I wonder what they're testing.
Yeah, well, what they're testing, I mean, this is one of the reasons it's referred to as the Underwater Area 51.
Yeah, supposedly they're testing torpedoes, but when is the last time we have ever used a torpedo in an act of war?
Yeah.
The Korean War.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, and so that's what they're doing, for spending billions of dollars out there.
And Andros, it's located, most of the base is underwater. It's located on Andros Island in the Bahamas, which is the largest and least explored of the 26 islands in the Bahamas. And it's at the edge of something called the tongue of the ocean, where the ocean floor drops off to a depth of 6,000 feet. Okay, in 2009, we traveled there with the History Channel's UFO hunters to reenact what had happened to Bruce 40 years earlier. We flew in Bruce's Cessna. By this time, he had a Cessna 182.
I wouldn't go into a little Cessna. You did, right?
Little did we know we shouldn't have.
No.
But we flew from West Palm to Andros, and as we approached the island, and we all saw it, Bruce, his wife, Rob, and me, the water suddenly glowed with kind of a neon brilliance. It was like seeing a special effect in a movie or something, like the northern lights glowing beneath the water. Yeah, it only lasted a few seconds, and we thought maybe it was a reflection of the sunlight, but Bruce thought it was really significant.
And it was just as we approached Andros that we saw that. And the reason we were going there is we were going there for the History Channel's UFO Hunters program to be interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I liked that show.
Yeah, that
was a good show. And so while we were there, the crew decided they wanted to see if they could get into AWTEC to interview the commander, interview anybody.
Oh, fat chance, right?
Right.
As soon as we got near the base entrance, first a black helicopter started hovering right over us, and it was very loud and disturbing and blowing on us. And then a cop car came up and parked right in front of the entrance. So we decided it wasn't a very nice, pleasant welcome. So we just turned around and walked off. So there was, and this has happened to other documentary film crews, that they try to get interviewed, and they don't get rejected. They just don't get any response at all from AWTEC. But here's another synchronicity. 4 months later, we were in Sarasota, Florida, where our daughter was going to college. And we one evening we went out to a bar restaurant. And it was very crowded. There was a band playing, and there was only one table that it was a high top table. It was already occupied by a couple other people, so we sat across from them and gradually started talking to them. And who does it turn out is sitting across from us but the recently retired commander of AUTEC.
There you go.
Who was in charge when we were there 4 months earlier.
And that's what you mean by these synchronicities. Huh?
Exactly. Meaningful coincidence. Very meaningful for us. And it was fascinating talking to him. I mean, we were interrupted a lot by the music, and he was very curious about why we were there and about the UFO stories. But he kept to the line that they were investigating underwater surveillance and testing of weapons. And then we realized that maybe is true, that what they're possibly dealing with is USOs.
Unidentified submerged objects.
Right. And that is part of what their objective is. And in fact, we were able to talk to a couple of former AUTEC employees who had some interesting stories about such objects.
Well, that's pretty good. I want to talk about Connie Gann.
Boxes of belongings, and she and John, as I said, were following her husband in the moving van. Okay, they were about 100 miles south of Atlanta, near Macon. Not much traffic. It was night. When suddenly she was really confused about where she was. She was no longer on the interstate. She was certain she hadn't taken an exit, and yet she and her son were now driving on this strange grid of roads without buildings. And she didn't see anything she recognized. She was incredibly tired, but she kept driving. I mean, she had to get somewhere. And the next thing she knew, she and her son were on their knees outside their vehicle on a black asphalt tarmac near airplane hangars, sobbing hysterically. Circling overhead were several noisy helicopters and 3 round, softly grumbling spacecraft. In front of her and John were a group of Greys, 3 of them, and several military men in fatigues and heavy boots who held really big assault weapons. Now, the Greys just seemed to be sort of loitering around the area. But one of the military men pointed an assault weapon directly at Connie and in a menacing tone said to her, "If you ever, you will never see your family again." And she had no idea what he was talking about. If she ever told what was happening, she was too terrified to
what
think.
She saw, anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So suddenly she and John are back in the car, and she has no memory of actually getting into the car. And where were the military men, the Greys, the choppers, the spacecraft, right? Everything she had just seen minutes ago was now gone. So her son immediately fell into a deep sleep, and Connie, who was barely able to keep her eyes open, just kept driving aimlessly through this labyrinth of paved roads, another asphalt grid, and she had no idea where she was. There were no houses, no landmarks, no buildings. She finally saw a convenience store and stumbled inside. She somehow told the female clerk that she gotten lost off of I-75 and that she needed directions back to the interstate. Well, first of all, on military bases, you don't find convenience stores with, cigarettes and lotto tickets and this kind of thing. You might find a commissary.
The commissary. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
The commissary's always there.
Yeah, right. But she said this was a convenience store. So anyway, the clerk told Connie she was on Warner Robins Air Force Base and had to leave through the same guard gate where she'd entered. So Connie, trying to explain reasonably, said she hadn't come through a guard gate. But the clerk insisted she couldn't have gotten onto the base in any other way. And so Connie realized it was futile to argue with this woman, and besides, she was so exhausted she could hardly talk. So she followed the clerk's instructions and eventually found her way back to I-75. Okay, by this time, her husband and 2 sons realized that Connie's not behind them. And so Ted pulls over to the side of the road to wait. Well, time passes. The Olds doesn't show up. He kept waiting. And finally he got back on the interstate figuring that maybe they had stopped for a pit stop or something to eat. Then he stopped again. By the time, this happened several times. And finally, this is in the days before cell phones. So he figured they'd just keep driving and eventually Connie and John would catch up to them. Well, they arrived in St. Augustine, and 3 hours later, Connie and John finally pull in. So now we have an experience where 5 people have experienced this
the same thing. Yeah.
Right. Her husband and 2 sons have waited 3 hours for Connie and John to show up. Well, Connie was too out of it to even explain to Ted what had happened. And she and John fell asleep on the porch of the new house. And she said for days afterwards she was completely disoriented. It was like post-traumatic stress syndrome. Okay, now what's interesting about this is Warner Robins is located just east of and adjacent to the city of Warner Robins, Georgia, which is 18 miles southeast of Macon.
Mm-hmm.
It's the state's fourth largest city. Okay, now, granted, along I-75, even today, there are pockets of darkness where, if you're driving at night and you're tired, it's easy to imagine things. But that doesn't explain what happened to her. I mean, how did she get 18 miles off the interstate in this huge Oldsmobile on a military base without going through a guard gate?
Right. There's questions here about whether this actually happened in the way it seemed. There's been a lot of conjecture about the military being involved with Grays, but these could be screen memories that were that she.
And what do you mean by screen memories?
That implanted memories, rather than blanking her mind, they implanted memories where she could have been looking at several Grays, and they might appear as if they're military, American military.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and in fact, there's one of the other people we write about who we haven't talked yet. Diane Fine had an experience where she was abducted after going to a rock concert.
She's number 4, right?
Yeah, right. And in what was very odd about this is when she is abducted, who does she find among the Grays but the singer of the band who she was watching?
Roy Orbison.
No. I don't think it was Roy Orbison, but
and it was some rock and roller, and she said, "What's he doing here?" And as soon as she said that, she was angry. They said, communicating telepathically to her mentally, said, "We thought you liked him."
So they brought him along. Huh?
But as soon as she said, they saw that she was upset by this. He just transmuted into a Gray. So it was like
there's a shape-shifting, camouflage thing that happened.
They basically were tricking her.
Yeah, this is the trickster.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Now, one of Connie's other really unusual encounters happened some years after her move to St. Augustine, and it occurred in the middle of the night around 3:30. This 3:30, 3:33 seem to be real common times for these abductions.
And have you found that in these 4, these things have happened to them time and time again?
Well, to Connie and Diane Fine, definitely. They're both lifelong abductees.
Okay.
And Bruce, of course, has had his repeated UFO things. So Connie awakens to find herself standing on a street corner a couple of blocks from her house. She's wearing her nightgown, and she became aware of a rumbling sensation under her feet and knew what it meant. There were 3 space vehicles approaching, and she knew the ships held these entities that would control her and leave her ill and listless and despairing. So she tried to hide. Nothing worked. Suddenly she was inside one of the vessels and seated in what looked like a desk chair. She had a metal strap stretching across her belly that restrained her. She didn't have any idea how she'd gotten from the street to the craft. So as she's in this seat, the ship felt like it was spinning, but also moving at the same time. And when it abruptly stopped, she felt like vomiting. It's that nausea, that seasickness.
Yeah.
And then an entity looms in front of her, one of these Grays with large black eyes, and spoke in sort of a metallic voice and ordered her to look down. And as she looked down at the floor, it was like the floor became like an infrared light that came on it. She could see houses below the craft, and she could also see inside rooms, see furniture, see people sleeping in their beds. Well, instead of being terrified this time, she became enraged. And she demanded, she says, "Well, what do you want me to see? These people are asleep. It's the middle of the night. What do you want me to see?" And all the while, the Gray entity was right in front of her, staring into her eyes, and that just made her more furious. Now, here, the next morning, then just like that, it's morning, and she's back in bed. When she sat up, blood just poured from her right nostril. I believe this is when she received that implant in her sinus, and the right side of her body felt numb. She thought she'd had a stroke. So she shouted for her husband, and by the time they reached the hospital, Connie couldn't even walk. Her husband had to carry her into the ER. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. A CAT scan revealed that her brain wasn't bleeding, no blood clots, no aneurysm, no stroke, nothing unusual, except for a small anomalous shadow that appeared on the right side of her nose in a sinus scan. So she went home without saying a word to anybody about this, and all she knew was that it was real and that it had happened.
And how many implants did she have in her? Just the one?
Well, she feels she has one. They both been documented. One is behind her mastoid bone.
That's just where Whitley Strieber's has one.
Right.
Same
exactly.
place.
And the other one in her sinus.
And do you think it's a tracking device? What do you think it is?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that these people are branded kind of like we brand sheep or cattle, and that it makes them easier to find. You know, and so like for somebody like Connie, whose first abduction...
It's like a little GPS device.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's my impression. Now, what's interesting, though, is Diane Fine doesn't think she has any kind of implant. So maybe it varies from people, from person to person.
There's another interesting story with Connie, too, and she was one time she was abducted with her youngest son again, and this time she was inside a craft. It was like an octagon inside, and there were gurneys, tables, stretchers, and it was like an emergency room with no curtains or anything. And some of the tables had humans on them. Some were clothed, some were completely naked. And the Greys were doing something to the humans. She didn't know what. There were Greys everywhere. And but Connie and her son were on their feet, and they were clothed, and they were rushing and racing around, trying to locate some kind of exit, but there wasn't one. And it was somehow transmitted to them that the Greys were trying to change their identities, that the change had already begun. So the Greys chasing them were acting very clumsy, unable to catch them. And on one part of the circle with the stretchers, there appeared to be a huge control board or system that went from the floor to the ceiling of the craft, and it looked like computers and other types of high-tech equipment with all these flashing lights and colors and buttons and levers and switches. And seated at the console, was a former NASA ground astronaut that Connie knew. His name is Clark McClelland.
Oh, sure. We know Clark.
Yeah. Connie knew him because he had asked her to help him.
Both Diane and Connie, were they taken to an alien hybrid nursery?
Yes, they were.
What did they see?
Some pretty disgusting things.
And where was the nursery?
Well, I think the nursery was in a spaceship. I mean, that was my impression.
Or it could have been on another planet. Who knows?
Yeah, it could have been. They don't know. But the idea was that they go to this place, wherever it is, spaceship, another planet, whatever, and they see infants, or sometimes just young children, that are abnormally aged. And Connie reported that they had this noxious kind of an inhuman odor. And the fetuses, she also saw fetuses, and the fetuses she saw floated in a kind of yellow liquid that was tinged with green, and that foul odor just radiated from the infant she held. And, of course, the Greys would put the infant into her arms and say, you have to love it and talk to it or it's going to die. And, of course, she, being a mother...
did what she had to do.
Yeah, she did what she had to do, and she said it just broke her heart. And Diane reported the same thing. I mean, Diane didn't report the odor, but she said these experiences were the most horrifying parts of their abduction.
Were these mutants? What were they?
Well, Connie, it was interesting enough, Connie wrote to Dr. David Jacobs from Templeton, who's one of the big researchers in this field.
And by the way, he believes there's something very evil going on here with the extraterrestrial.
I'll tell you, none of these people have felt that these experiences were positive.
Although some of them have had positive experiences with other entities. It seems a pretty universal idea that the Greys are not the...
they're not the nice guys.
They're not the good ones.
But Connie theorizes that, she said one time she was watching television and she saw this TV special on children who have progeria, Now, about 1 in every 8 million kids in the world have this. It's considered to be a genetic mutation, but scientists haven't yet been able to find out what gene causes it. And these kids look like ancient old people.
Yeah, they're bald and short. They have wrinkled faces, no eyebrows or eyelashes, a large head, dry, thin skin.
And Connie feels that these are like insemination experiments that have gone bad. Okay, she believes that the embryos were left in situ in the womb to gestation and birth as opposed to being harvested and taken to hybrid nurseries like Diane's pregnancy was.
Now, but these would they call these kids deformed?
Yeah. I mean, progeria children are deformed.
What were they going to do with them?
Well, that's a good question. She just thinks that they're, that over the centuries, the decades, or however long a period of time, that the aliens, number one, are harvesting, ovum and sperm, to create hybrids, and that some of these hybrid experiments have gone bad.
Yeah.
And that's what these nurseries are filled with.
Like the island of Dr. Moreau. Right?
Yeah. I mean, just bizarre kind of things.
So why a hybrid breeding program? Is it a breeding program for their own planet, or are they going to bring them all back here and get rid of us?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, there seem to be. I think both may be true. I don't know that there's just one answer to this.
Or neither could be true. It's not necessarily what we think. It might not necessarily be what we think it is. They may it could be a screen memory that they're implanting on us, and something else altogether is going on. But the hybrid insemination seems to be what everybody reports over and over.
Well, that's kind of scary, isn't it?
Well, I think it's terrifying. It reminds me of that. What was that movie that Christopher Reeve was in, The Village of the Damned?
Yeah.
Yeah, where there's a blackout and the women in the village are basically inseminated by aliens, and these weird children are born who have these supernatural abilities. Although they looked weird, they did look like kids with progeria, but they were weird.
So tell me about this ghost ship. What the heck is this all about?
Okay, this is a whole different twist here on the alien UFO saga. When we were first married, we went on a honeymoon we found a ticket to Santiago, Chile for $299 round trip, and so we jumped on that, and we had no idea what we were going to do when we got there. We just decided to just let synchronicity play out and see what happened. So there was a woman sitting on the plane next to us, and we asked her, where's an interesting place for us to go, something mysterious in Chile, mystical. And she said, you've got to go to Chiloé, the island of Chiloé. It turns out the island of Chiloé is way in the south, and it's off the coast of the southern, almost the southern tip of Chile. And
it's where land transportation in the country ends.
Right. And we're coming from South Florida in July, and we suddenly find ourselves in winter and underdressed when we get down there. We took a train down there from Santiago, then we took a ferry out to the island, and we just started exploring around, and one of the first things we found, we stayed at a bed and breakfast, and there in the common room, we found a book about the Caliuche, about this ghost ship. And this is what the woman we met on the airplane had told us that we should take a look at, because this island has a very strong mystical base to it, where the people believe in mermaids, this ghost ship, the Caliuche, and
they believe that this Caliuche is manned by this crew of brujos who come to the island and abduct people. I mean, the parallels with the alien abduction is just striking.
In fact, the man who wrote the
strange, huh?
Yeah.
The the man who wrote the book had an experience himself, and that's what got him to pursue stories of other people who had been abducted by these people who came off this ghost ship. His experience is he was with three friends, and they were in a rowboat, and they were rowing, and right at dusk, and suddenly this fog came and surrounded them, and through the fog came this other boat that was moving along soundlessly. It wasn't a big ship. One of the things about the Kaliushas is that it can change shapes. It can even there's even a story about it being in the shape of a large, huge log that appeared out of nowhere on the beach. That was covered with crows for like 50 years until somebody came with an axe and chopped into it, and it started bleeding. And the next day, the log was gone, the birds were gone, and the guy who hit it with the axe also was gone as well. But anyhow, the author, he was out there. They were rowing. This boat glides past them. They don't see any crew and no sound. And they keep rowing and rowing, as he explains it, all night long. And in the morning, when the sun comes out, they are in the same exact spot where they were when they saw that boat go by. Now, to us, that story doesn't quite ring true, because what we think happened is they were abducted, and they were put back in that same spot where they were taken. Because the idea of rowing a boat all night long seems preposterous.
Well, of everybody that may be abducted and brought back, how many do you think aren't brought back?
Well, if you believe the 4400 TV show, there are a lot.
It could be.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that TV show had hit on a lot of truths.
Hundreds of thousands of people every year, hundreds of thousands of people disappear. On
and
this
nobody
planet.
knows where they are.
They have no idea where they are. I mean, it's a big planet, but I mean, come on, 100,000, 200,000 people gone, just missing, and it's not the rapture.
No, that's for sure.
So something bizarre is happening.
It also, just planetary-wise, it's in terms of people's consciousness, something is happening. So there's definitely a shift of some sort going on. I mean, there are more reported sightings, there are more reported abductions. It's just like we're so hooked in and wired into each other now that the frequency of these things, it's accelerating.
Do you think the government knows what's going on?
Yes.
Why do you think that, Trish?
Well, just to give you our personal experience, after we put up these posts about the Quebec encounters, we have most bloggers have a stat counter on their blog that tells you, gives you quite a bit of information about who's coming to your blog. And so after we started putting up these posts on the Quebec encounter, we got hits from the FBI, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense Network Information System, the Navy Network Information Center, the FCC, the Social Security Administration, and that one was really puzzling. I mean, Social Security for aging aliens, the 754th Electronic Systems Group, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, if you take a look at these last two organizations, the 754th Electronic System Group operates out of an Air Force base, Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. And according to the Air Force, they provide what they call responsive information systems to support more efficient and effective logistics. In other words, they're spies. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police is the equivalent of the Canadian National Police Force, comparable to the FBI.
Yeah, we have a different impression of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. When I told people this story about them coming to our blog to look at our posts on UFOs, they said a couple of people said, "Oh, cops on horses chasing UFOs! How interesting!" But also, when you posted on your blog that we were going to be there, we and put our website on within an hour, we had a hit from Homeland Security on her.
Really?
Yeah.
I know. They watch us, so I'm sure they
we've
get our
also
information.
since then had hits from every agency we just named, except for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police associated with your show.
Oh,
so,
great.
I mean, they're definitely watch you.
Yes, they do. But I'm a patriot. 9 years military. I love this country. May not be happy with everything government does, but has nothing to do with the country. Jeez.
Well, also, we had a weird thing happen. In 2009, we went to a book fair in St. Augustine, and the woman who put this book fair together was an ordained minister from one of the local churches. And some years before, she had been married to a guy who was an engineer who had been hired as an outside contractor to build Cape Canaveral. So one night, they're out, they have this sighting along the Indian River, and Charles, her husband, pulls over to the side of the road, and they just stand there watching this thing just do these incredible maneuvers. And it probably went on for 10 or 15 minutes. And as soon as it was over, her husband knew exactly what to do. He pulled out a card and called a number, okay?
Yeah.
All the engineers who had been hired had been given a card with a number on it to call in the event of a sighting.
How about that? We're going to come back and take some phone calls with both of you in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. We'll talk about aliens, abductions, synchronicity, even Indiana Jones when we come right back with your calls on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, your phone calls this hour. Rob and Trish McGregor with us, authors of a number of books, including Aliens in the Backyard. And Rob and Trish, where do we get the book?
You can get the book at Amazon as a Kindle or at crossroadpress.com in print, which would be hardcover or trade paperback. And also at Barnes & Noble for the Nook.
Excellent. Do you think past presidents knew about the UFO and ET existence?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them did, but also...
Not all of them.
No, not all of them.
I think there's been an interest, especially Clinton. Bill Clinton had an interest in it, but I'm not sure that they're right at the top of the food chain in the UFO scenario. I think that, there may be a group that is outside of control of the government in the normal sense and has their own black budget and are in a situation where they can call the shots related to UFO research.
I think you're right. It's much, much bigger than governments, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just the fact that we've gotten all these weird government hits. I mean, these are not just not just spiders or bots coming on cued to certain words. These are people who stay on the blog for a while,
Oh yeah.
Reading the posts. Yeah, it's not like they're cued to words for UFO or aliens.
Do they post under anonymous names or anything like that, or fictitious names?
We haven't seen that. That might, if they do, we're not aware of it. But we were able to track, like, when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came on, they spent, was it
8 hours?
8 hours, was it? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And if this was somebody who was just doing this, some secretary, that person would be fired. You can't. This person was assigned for that day's work to read all these stories about the Quebec encounter and give some report back to some authority person. So it's. They're very interested. In the Canadian government, they've been a little more open than the U.S. government.
Yeah, they have.
Releasing information, but yet they still maintain the same negative view that it doesn't. They don't.
I think that was thanks to Paul Hellyer, the former defense minister up there.
Yeah, I think so too.
That helped a lot. What was your experience with the late Bud Hopkins, who was the abductee investigator too?
Yeah, we met Bud at a UFO conference that we covered for Omni Magazine, and he while he was in South Florida, it was Hollywood, Florida, where it was located. The conference was located. He went on a radio show out of Miami, and he got a call from a person that he really felt was a strong abductee case, and she was in Lake Worth, about 40 miles away, and he wanted to go meet her and see what he could find out. and he didn't have a rental car or anything, and we just happened to be there and listen to him say he was looking for a way of getting there, and we offered to drive him up there. So he came in our car, and and we drove him up. At first, he was suspicious of us. He thought we were some government agents ourselves.
Spies.
He kept asking us questions and trying to
get you.
Are we really with Omni Magazine, or is that just some kind of cover? And but the thing is, we had an old car and the air conditioning didn't work, and it just didn't fit the mold.
I don't know. If you were going to be a government spy, I guess I'd dress you down and see what happened.
That's true. So
put a little Indiana Jones book under your arm and send you on your way.
So we got up there and met this couple and their son, and she was describing her experience. But while she was talking to Bud, describing her abduction experience, we were sort of fascinated by the husband. He was a big guy with sweeping silver hair, dressed totally in black, and he had a gold Satan,
like a devil's head,
pendant around his neck.
Whoa.
So, I took him aside and asked him what that was about, and he said he was
that he had changed sides.
He
was a Satanist?
He was a former Baptist minister who had left the ministry and was apparently a Satanist. Now, Bud paid no attention to this aspect at all. He was just focused on Carrie, the woman, and her experience, and it just went past him. He just didn't seem interested at all, and for us, we were happy to get out of there when we did. He was staying overnight, and that was we wished him well. But anyhow, he did a regression with her. It was very interesting. She described how she. 3 Greys came into her room and literally floated her out of the bed, down the hallway, through the wall, and into this light elevator, and they rose slowly up towards a craft.
And she was paralyzed, of course.
Yeah, she could move, but she could see, and she could communicate with them. And oddly enough, she lived very close to the location of the National Enquirer, which back in those days was in Lake Worth, and they did a lot of reporting on UFOs. One of the few publications that was doing it, and they also, it was Christmas time, and they also had used to have this huge Christmas tree lights, and they had a big display and a little train and a whole Santa garden there, and so she pointed it out to. The
Greys.
The Greys, and Bud asked her, what did they think? And she said, they weren't impressed. We wrote that up for Omni, and the editor thought that was incredible.
Well, let's go to the phones. Sanford, Florida we go, east of the Rockies. Robert, you're on with Rob and Trish McGregor.
Fantastic. George, it's good to talk to you again.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. I talked to you about 3 years ago. I was the EMT that ran the CPR on the lightning strike.
Oh, I remember that. Great story.
Remember that?
Great story.
Yes, sir. Back in that happened in 92, I believe it was. But back in 1980, when I was a fresh firefighter, just got certified, actually certified about a year earlier, I went down to AUTEC. And, AUTEC,
oh, boy.
Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center, on an orientation and hiring type outing there, and spent about 3 days. They flew me back and forth from Fort Lauderdale, where I stayed in a hotel every night, and next morning back on the airplane, back out to AUTEC again. And I've been through every building except one, and that one building, which wasn't out very big, your guest said something about doing underwater surveillance and that sort of thing, and that's exactly what they did. As far as this one building goes, it was so top secret that there was only a couple of people on the base at any one time that was allowed to get anywhere near it.
Yeah,
was it shaped like a dome? Do you remember?
It was not really all that big, probably about the size of maybe put two 7-Elevens together, about that size.
Yeah, we had heard about this building from people who had worked in there, that somebody who had even top clearance could not go into that building.
Yes. What we were told is, what I was told as a firefighter was, anything that happens pertaining to that building, run like hell. That's pardon the language, but that's quote unquote. And there was a whole lot of that. One other thing that you may not be privy to is they also did quite a bit of dolphin testing down there.
Yeah, we had heard that too.
Dolphin testing. Why do you think they would do that, Trish?
Well, I mean, I think it's well known, I don't know if it's well known, but it's known that the military uses dolphins for weaponry. I mean, they attach weapons to dolphins.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Yeah, so I mean, it's...
At least on an experimental basis.
Yeah. I mean, our daughter actually did an internship at Disney.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't even go into this. I don't want to get anybody in trouble.
Hey, you opened up a can of worms now.
Watch what you say.
Really?
But she had some contact with that program, which is it was involved in her college, but that they since discontinued, and they're no longer doing that anymore. They say, but it was a military contract they had.
All right, next, Sarah, Longmont, Colorado, first-time caller. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hey, good to have you with us. Sure thing.
So I kind of have a story followed by a question. I really haven't told it to that many people. So
it sounds familiar.
I, as a small child, went through kind of a very bizarre sequence of events, and I'm not sure if I was abducted, so that's kind of what I'm asking about. So here's basically what happened. At about 5:30-ish, the light's still out, sun's kind of setting, I went and took my nightly bath, and next thing I know, I wake up, and mind you, it's like the middle of December, and there's snow on the ground, and it's freezing cold. I wake up, it's like pitch black dark outside, it's like about 9:30 at night. The window to the bathroom is wide open, and I have this feeling of like sheer terror. And I felt like something was outside the window. And it was like I was frozen for a period of like 10 or 15 minutes. I don't know. It seemed like forever, as a kid. And then all of a sudden, I decided I'm just going to make a run for it back to my room,
How old were you?
I try to stand up, and I can't lift my head. And I reach back, and it's just like sheer pain. And I realize I have this huge bump on the back of my neck.
Oh, my God.
And my dad, I show him, I can't lift my head. I'm, like, sobbing because it hurts so bad. And by then, like, everything else had kind of vanished from my mind except for this bump. And my dad immediately takes me, to the doctors, and they can't figure out what's going on. They try to draw fluid from it. It's not like a cyst. It's not anything, glandular. They were doing all these scans, x-rays. They can't figure out what it is.
Totally baffled, huh?
Yeah, and so...
How old were you?
I was 10.
Uh-huh.
And I might have been 11. I'm very vague on the time period, but I remember that about 3 days later, the swelling went down, and the doctors kind of shrugged and said, well, if, it happens again, come back. And we didn't really think anything of it until about 2.5 weeks later. I wake up to get ready for school, and that same bump is back on my neck, and I can't lift my head again. Except this time, the swelling went down within about 24 to 48 hours. And now I've left with this weird, like, cat's eye shaped thing on my spine. Nobody knows what it is. We've checked with doctors. They don't know. Like, it's not like some kind of weird cyst or tumor. And I'm just like, I've never encountered anybody who's experienced anything like this. And, frequently I get this feeling at night since this has happened that I'm being watched. And I don't know whether it's just me or I'm paranoid, but it's just one of those things that So I wanted to talk to some people who had some expertise in the field of like abductions and stories and things like that to see what you guys thought.
Well, let me give you an explanation that the skeptics would provide. They would say that what happened is when you were getting out of the bathtub, you fell and hit your head, and then you can't remember what happened afterwards, and you have that bump. But then they would be overlooking, though, the question, why is the window open? What was that about? And that's usually the case with the skeptic's explanation. They focus on one particular area that they think they have an explanation for, and they ignore the anomalies.
Hi, thanks for taking my call,
sure,
George.
Thanks, Joe.
I was contacted when I was 9 years old, and I believe I have the answers that you people are looking for. Now, you have to understand, at the time, my parents had gone through a brutal divorce, and what happened was I had gone up in my room crying, and I prayed to God, and I asked, why is this happening to me? You know, what's going on? Well, shortly after that is when I had this experience. Now, what happened was I had this paper route, okay, and I lived in New England and in a rural neighborhood. Now, the newspaper that I delivered was a weekly paper, not a daily, and so they used to drop the papers at my driveway after dinner time every Thursday night. And I would go out after dinner, and I had about 40 customers, and I would drive around the neighborhood on my bicycle. Well, and it was summertime, and that night, some very strange things happened. When I was driving through the neighborhood on my bike, the first thing that I noticed was when I went around the corner and turned down this particular street, all the lights were out. Everything, all the street lights, the house lights, and that was the first thing that got my attention. The next thing that got my attention was there was this silence, which is indescribable. It was a perfect silence, like I was frozen in time. It was like every molecule was frozen at the position of attention. And there was a swamp through the woods, so typically there was a symphony of, crickets and bullfrogs and katydids. Right. But that night there was nothing. And the only thing I could hear was my bicycle chain. So it caught my attention so much that I actually stopped my bicycle in the middle of the road to eliminate all sound, just so that I could listen and is this really happening? And it was. And it was right at that moment when I realized that it was truly silent. It wasn't my imagination. This craft it was totally silent, and it was huge. And it just hovered over my head like 100 feet off the ground, like a treetop level. This craft was cylindrical, and it didn't fly in line like a torpedo or a missile, but rather it was as if, you can imagine, there was a sheet of plate glass at treetop height, and it ever so slowly rolled over the top of my head. The craft had 2 circles of white lights through the center of it. And on the ends of the craft, it had 2 more circles of lights that were rainbow-colored, okay? And that's how you could tell it was rotating, because the lights. And it was perfectly silent. There was perfect silence. And I was sitting on my bicycle seat with my feet down on the road, to balance it, and I was just underneath this thing looking up, like just blown away, okay? And I remember all that up until this point, like a memory, like when you went on vacation last year or something. It was right at that moment, though, everything kind of blacked out, and I don't really remember much. And then the next thing I remember, I was standing in the road, and the craft was still there above my head. And it just disappeared. I mean, it took off so fast that had it moved any faster, it would have just blinked out. You know, I could see a light streak, like, past the stars. And
how much missing time was there?
Excuse me?
How much missing time do you think there was?
3 hours. Well, that's what I was going to say next. I typically would go out about 6 o'clock and come in about 8 p.m. Well, that night when I came home, my mother was in the kitchen when I came in the kitchen, and she was completely, like, distraught. You know, she had been crying. And when I came into the kitchen, she was like, "Oh, my God, where have you been? We've been so worried about you." And I looked at the clock, and it was 11:30.
Wow.
So I called the police to report that I saw a UFO. And within minutes, there were 5 unmarked cars in my driveway.
That is unbelievable.
Wow.
Men who, I think they were government agents. They weren't police officers. They were wearing suits.
They were called. You called the police department, they called them.
Yeah. Well, what happened was she was like, "Where have you been?" And I was like, "I saw a UFO." And she was like, "Oh, my God, you're crazy." and they didn't believe me, so I called the police.
I wonder if it was government, if it was a government vehicle.
I believe I have the answers for all of this, okay, because things were shown to me. So, and I'll try to be brief.
During that 3 hours?
You have to let me explain. So anyway, these men show up, and they had unmarked cars, and they said, "Son," and when I went out and saw them in the driveway, I was like, my parents, my family thinks I'm crazy, and they said, "Son," they said, "our phone has not stopped ringing for the last 3 hours. We do not think you're crazy. And we want to ask you if you can help us. We want you to sit in the back of the car here. You're not in any trouble or anything, but we have a man here who is a police artist, and we want you to describe to him exactly what you saw." And I did that, and they took the information and they left. Well, the real story is what has happened to me ever since. This is 40 years ago, and I have been homeless and destitute, and somebody is destroying my life. I haven't been in one place for a year for 40 years.
Do they chase you out, John? Is that what happens?
I can't. Time does not permit me to go into everything. But
all right, it's a remarkable story.
Wow, that is. That's scary.
I think people are being monitored. There's no question. Once he made his call, they were all over him.
Right. There was a similar experience that happened to a woman who is a poet and artist from Shreveport, Louisiana, where she was on a bus going from one town to another. This is in the 60s. And all of a sudden, along the side of the bus was a craft, and everybody on the bus saw it and freaked out, and the bus driver was trying to outrun it, and, people were crying and sobbing, "Let us off the bus." Well, the bus driver finally got to the city where they were headed, and this is Janine Gilstrap. She gathered her kids, got off the bus, and suddenly she was so freaked out that she thought that they were after her. So she gathered her kids, left her baggage at the bus station, took a cab to her mother's house. Within a couple of hours, 3 men in black, we kid you not, these were 3 guys in black, appeared at her mother's house, asked her to draw what she had seen, and she did. And then she asked for a card from one of the guys, and he gave it to her. And it turned out that when she called that number a few days later, they never heard of the guy. So, what this past caller was just talking about, it's part of a pattern.
That's interesting. All right, let's take some final calls. Lorenzo in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, east of the Rockies. Lorenzo, go ahead.
Hi, this is Lorenzo. Like I said, I'm from Pittsburgh.
Uh-huh.
And I live real close to the city, okay, like right by Hinesfield. You can see Hinesfield from my house. So we're real close to the city, row houses. When when I was about, say, 8 or 9 years old, this would have been 92, 93, I used to have dreams when I was a kid that a spaceship would land on our kitchen roof, and our kitchen roof is a flat roof adjacent to my bedroom. Like, I look out my window, and that's the flat roof right outside of my window. So I used to have dreams of ships landing on that little tiny roof. It's in the city, though, so it'd have to be a small craft to land on that roof. And like I said, just had these dreams. And then one day, again, when I was like 8 or 9, I just woke up in the middle of the night with a bald spot the size of a quarter on the back of my head.
Wow.
So my mom was like, how did you get that? Did you fall yesterday? I needed nothing. I just woke up with this perfectly bald. It was like shaved, but closer than a shave, almost like burned away, just gone. So
were there any protrusions on your skull?
Nothing. Just that bald spot, just right on the back of my head. Now, I still have a bald spot a little smaller than a penny on the back of my head.
So your hair never grew back?
Never. But when I went to the doctors, they always said it was alopecia. That's what they were saying it was. So they had me use some shampoo and all this. It never grew back. But that's the only explanation I've ever had for it. I never really told anybody, but I've always been fascinated with aliens since that, though, which is weird.
Has anything else happened to you since then?
Never.
Well, what's interesting is we took Charles Fontaine and his wife and daughter all carried around vials of holy water during the year.
Holy water?
Yeah, during the year after their encounter. And he blessed his property.
Did they think this was demonic or what?
Well, because of what had happened to him in the graveyard, they were afraid that maybe their house they attracted spirits, or that the aliens were monitoring them.
Yeah, you have to understand, he sees this link between the aliens and the spirit world, and so that he was fighting off these entities, whatever were in the house that he was feeling.
And so we took the vial. We asked him to mail the vial of holy water to us, and we didn't touch it. He sealed it in a plastic baggie, and we drove up to Casadega, Florida, a spiritualist community in Central Florida, just north of Disney World, and asked a psychometrist named Kathy Adams to read the vial. Now, she didn't know anything. All I said was, this vial belongs to somebody else, and I inadvertently spilled the fact that it was a male. And what she picked up on ultimately was that the abduction, that he was abducted, and that the abduction was for entertainment. So Rob and I had never heard of anything like this. So after we heard it from her, we decided we'd better do a little bit of more research, and we've actually found a book by Brad Steiger in which he talks about that very thing, that some entities do this for entertainment.
That's right. They have their jollies that way.
Right. You blow up in some random guy's head for fun.
Yeah. There's one other thing I'd like to put in before we have to get off, and that there is we've heard from a lot of people who might have been abducted, probably were abducted. There's a Roper organization survey from 2002 that was a private survey for psychiatrists, a psychiatric organization that found out that 33 million Americans fit the profile of alien abductees, and that's an incredible number.
It sure is. Let's take another call. Patricia in Sacramento, California. Go ahead, Patricia.
Good evening. I'm so pleased to talk with you.
Gotcha. Don't have a lot of time for you, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll make it very brief. As a young girl, preschool, I used to complain to my mother. I would say, Mom, make them stop making me take pictures. I had felt like a camera had been put in my throat, in my neck.
Oh, my God.
And whenever I was out someplace that I hadn't been before, which was a lot of places at that age, I would take pictures. This happened through my teens and my 20s. I could never do anything about it. It never stopped. And when I was in my 40s, I had a dream. I was laying on a metal table, very bright lights on me, and an alien being standing over me. And they had inserted something up my nose. And I remember being disturbed. I felt like I was choking. And it went all the way down my throat. And then there was like a rip where they pulled something out. And it startled me. I sat straight up in bed, and I'm like half in the dream, and I'm awake. And I grabbed for my face, and there was blood running down the front of me.
Sounds like a classic implant. We're out of time, both of you. Rob and Trish, thank you so much for being on the program. Good luck with everything
George.
you do.
Thanks.
And Rob, been a fan of yours for years, by the way.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more about Indiana Jones today.
Maybe next time.
Maybe another time.
You got that right. Thank you so
Take
much.
care, George.
Rob and Trish McGregor, their book, Aliens in the Backyard. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, George Knapp, John B. Wells, Ian Punnett, and Art Bell. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe.